Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Point podcast with me, Allie Christensen. I'm curating the content I wish I had had as a dancer and creating strong, healthy, thriving dancers for the future. Not only am I your host and ex-professional dancer, but I own Align Fitness, a cross-training studio for dancers here in Costa Mesa, California, and am the creator of online courses for dancers such as the Dancer Strong program, Lower Body Flexibility, and Turnout for Dancers. Welcome back, dancers. This is a fun episode, something a little bit different than what we've been focusing on in the last couple months. But in the spirit of this podcast being about creating dancer strong people who are healthy, thriving mentally, physically, and spiritually, this falls right in line with this. This dancer is an amazingly trained, beautiful human of a dancer, and she has so graciously agreed to come on and talk about her experience in creating her current dance film. This is something that just released. It's going into dance festivals. You can find some clips of it on Instagram, which we'll share. But she is just a lovely human who has been so gracious with sharing her experience, her time, the creative process, the ups and downs. This was something that she did over COVID as she was supposed to be taking off into her professional career, like so many of us. That COVID put a stop to it. And she really has made something of this time that is going to assist her to continue to move forward as we're getting back into what we call normal life. This will be a great episode to listen to as you go to dance, as you're headed to your rehearsals, get those creative juices going, and make sure you check out her stuff on Instagram so you can really, really tie together what we're talking about and the actual experience that she's sharing. So let's dive into our conversation. Mm-hmm. Hello, welcome. I'm really, really, really excited to be speaking with you here. As I said in the beginning, you have created a little masterpiece, piece of art that is something I believe completely different than what you've done in the past. And I've been able to witness some of the creation process from not there, but I've seen you week to week as you've been creating this. And I'm really excited to kind of piece things together and have you share what you've been working on and how you've been working on it and what's been going on in your world as you've made this. So before we jump into all of that, and I have a million questions for you, can you introduce yourself? Tell everyone a little bit about you as human and you as the dancer that's bringing you right here to this point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be sharing this with you. My name is Berenice. I graduated from Graham in 2020. I spent a little bit of time in a junior company in France over COVID, and now I'm in London freelancing and auditioning and doing all of that at the moment. As a person, I enjoy art of all sorts. I love going to museums. I love listening to music, especially classical music. That's very me. I'm very interested in being sort of very well-rounded in general. So I feel like that just even from before I started dancing, I always wanted to be well-rounded. So I went to normal school. I didn't go to any vocational school until later. I tried to approach things with balance, which is not easy, but it works for me. So yeah, that's about it. And I've spent the past year and a half, more or less, since summer 2020, working on this project. This is a dance film, and it's about 7 minutes long. Just over 7 minutes, and it's called iuSui, and came from the months that we spent in lockdown. And I guess like a lot of other works that are coming out at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the big things I wanted to ask you is where did this piece come from? But as you said, art is all about creating what we're experiencing for a visual audience, whatever that is. And we've spent now 2 years in a certain experience. And it's interesting to be starting to see pieces of work that are coming out that are betraying our experiences from all over the world. And I think something that from the very beginning, even if it was just the 2 weeks that we originally, at least here in the US, we were like 2 weeks, let's flatten the curve, whatever it was. But I remember thinking, this will be really fascinating to see what comes out of our art world after this 2 weeks. And then obviously out of these 2 years. And you are a prime example of that. I'm really excited. So as we're talking about this, when I asked Bernice to come on, she asked me, well, I'd love to, but why do you want me to come on to this podcast? We do a lot of sports medicine talk. We're talking about the body and how to take care of ourselves as dancers. And what I said to her is, the longer that I'm doing this podcast and this medium of sharing information, the more I'm realizing that for me, it's about giving dancers in the dance world access to people and resources who are doing something well, whatever that is, whether that's taking care of our bodies or nutrition, mental health. We've had dancers on sharing their experiences and some of the ups and downs. And the film industry, or how we are putting dance onto film or into film, has been blowing up. And it is something that is like a major way that we're sharing dance, and we're getting really creative about it. When I was young, we barely had like the ability to film things.
Mm-hmm.
Like we did not. I was thinking about this. We did not even film when you do choreography in the studio and then you film it so you remember it. We didn't do that. You just had to remember it. And we were like screwed if we didn't, I was thinking about that in preparation of this, of how far we've come being able to use film for our own skill, but then also to be able to share something that was only able to be shared in person before. We can now share it with literally the world in the way that we are doing this film, but also you get really creative about it. And that's what you've done. What was your initial thought when you decided you were going to take the skill that you have in the dance world and put it into a film?
So that was definitely not the thought. I didn't think, how can I create a film, or how can I make something for anyone else? I was really just exploring, and I suddenly had a lot more time on my hands than I usually did to explore this kind of thing. So I was actually, I suppose it started in my garage where I sort of made a little bit of space so I could move during the lockdowns. And I didn't set out to create a dance film at all. I was more really fascinated by how much fear and how much hope there was in the world at the same time. And this intense juxtaposition was so interesting to me, because we were all somehow, not all, I suppose, but a lot of the world was focused on the same thing and feeling very similar emotions, even though we were so quite literally distanced from one another. I felt this intense sense of community somehow with what everyone was going through at the same time. So it was really this sense of hope and fear that started this investigation into that. And I was reading quite a bit about it. There's quite a bit of philosophy written on precisely the two, how they live. One cannot be without the other. At least that's what I sort of think I've discovered. And from there, there was also an odd sense of peace, because there was so much tension that there was this strange sort of feeling of peace somehow within that, or a pause perhaps. And so I was really setting out to explore this sense of stillness or pause or peace. And I happened to be that summer, I happened to be spending in Sweden. We have a family house there, and there's a very large lake very close by. And this lake sometimes is very wavy. There's lots of waves, and sometimes it's completely still. But completely still, it's mirror still. And then I guess I started playing with this image of stillness and how to the beauty of that stillness. And I started playing, and I was only there with me, my mom, my dad, and my sister. And for them, I had them running around and helping me creating platforms we had an old wooden fence. So sort of took this wooden fence and put some like foam underneath so it would float, and then sort of sent it out, and I was standing there trying to dance on it, and my sister was filming me with the drone that we had gotten for this purpose, because I realized that an iPhone wasn't really going to cut it. And it just sort of evolved from there, and I realized when I finished this sort of exploration process that I really wanted to bring it forwards and fully create what I had envisioned. And for that, I needed more skilled professionals to help me with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I started looking and brought a crew together, and now we're here.
Yeah. It's interesting to me as you talked about finding the stillness during a very chaotic, emotionally chaotic time for a lot of people. And I think that it's like a true artist, or like inside an artist, that you are able to take the chaos and quote explore it, because other people just live in that chaos. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but the whole dance community went basically underground into our kitchens with our set up bars and tables. Yeah. And we went for some people, it's still going at this point that we're recording, where they're not in a studio and they're still experiencing the lack of in the dance community. Mm-hmm. But you said, I'm going to take this time to explore these dual realities and the stillness in the middle. But I'm going to do that by challenging my physical body, my creativity, my everything in the biggest possible way. I'm going to build a platform that makes me stand on a lake. And as you go on and tell more, I just remember thinking, my God, like she is going all the way here. This is not like, oh, I made a dance film in a studio or in a park. Like, you challenged the elements, you challenged your movement, you challenged your creativity, the costumes, everything to me it appeared everything but still in a really good way. So I find it really fascinating that you're like, I was exploring stillness. But I mean, that's art, right? The thing that we see is not always what it takes to make happen. And we know that as dancers, the work that we do to make something look so elegant or simple or easy is some of the hardest things you'll ever do. But you magnified that. So as you guys go and look at this film that she's created, you'll see obviously right away what we're talking about. But can you share a little bit of what you had to go through, maybe physically, emotionally, mentally, in creating movement that was so challenged by the elements, whether that was the fence thing that you built. Yeah. I know that filming days didn't always go as planned. There was water involved. There were costumes involved. There were a lot of things. So how did you navigate the emotional waves that I'm sure happened of like, this is working well, this is not, that's not what I thought this would be. This is, what did you go through with all of that?
A lot.
Yeah, I'm sure.
There was a lot of elements that I had not foreseen that then came up later when I had the full crew, or right before or during, even when the full crew was there. So I couldn't practice on the platform the whole time. I only had a couple of days really with the platform because it was delayed as well in coming. I had to create a new one. The fence wasn't stable enough, so I had a new one.
My homemade fence didn't float enough.
It was quite rotten. So by the end of that first summer, it was actually sinking. So I really couldn't use it. Yeah, and then also So the platform itself was challenging. It's unstable to begin with. The second one I got was slightly more stable. So I could walk almost to the edge of it. It's round, and it wouldn't tip or anything. So that was very useful. But obviously with any wind that's outside, you're sort of working on a pretty unstable surface. So anything that's meant to be slow and sustained is, if you're standing on one leg or something, gets very complicated. And also the surface area of the platform is very small. So there is very little, I couldn't travel on it at all.
That's something that your movement, you're very good at that. The ability to move through space. You have an excellent range in being grounded to the floor. And I would say that's there's lots of things that are beautiful about your dancing, but you have a really beautiful skill to travel and to move so gracefully. So to put you in a box basically and say, we're going to take that away from you.
That was actually very challenging because yes, I love traveling and I love using the space and the dynamics within the movement. And when you suddenly don't have the range to move in that way, then that was very challenging. I used a lot of upper body movement, mainly upper body movement, because the platform was so small, but also because I'm wearing this very large red skirt, which inhibits almost any leg movement, because the skirt was there. Well, A, it's a costume, but B, it also covers the platform. So any movements where the skirt then reveals the platform had to be changed so that I could keep it without revealing the platform itself. So there was sort of literal movement inhibition in terms of space and also in terms of what I was wearing. So it became very much upper body focused. And I had to really think about, how do I express and how do I create with essentially only half of my body, which was a very big challenge. And I went through quite a few creative blocks where I thought, I can't do this. It's never going to work. But I had a really fabulous team and I worked really closely with the director, Maria Salgado Lopez, and she really helped me a lot in those moments. I would send her footage, or sometimes we would work a little bit on Zoom, and then she could give me feedback or ideas if I was really struggling. So that was such a blessing to have someone else there to turn to when I was feeling like nothing was working. Yeah. Then we had other like unforeseen things, like the weather was terrible the first time we actually had to film it twice. So the first time we tried, we had terrible weather for an entire week. It was just gray rain and very cold and very windy. So we didn't have any of the conditions that we were hoping to get for the film, which also the weather was actually central to the work, because I wanted to give this feeling of peace and of stillness and of beauty. And if the weather is very gray and the water is very turbulent, it's actually sending the opposite message. So we had to refilm it. But those very windy, very cold days, it was very hard. I was out there for very many hours, and my body was absolutely frozen. I had goosebumps and my lips were blue and all of this. But yeah, then the second time round when we filmed it again, we had much better weather. So that already made a massive difference, because I could keep going for longer without breaks, because I wasn't so cold. I'd also, there was a little bit less wind, so the platform was a little bit more stable. I'd found another way to create. I had sewn multiple skirts again and tweaked them so that the platform would remain covered no matter what, which meant I had a little bit more range to move. So it was sort of a process to also figuring out all these elements that I hadn't necessarily thought about when I first had the idea. And this was very much ongoing because there was very little set, or I didn't have music, for example. We couldn't have music on the platform. The Bluetooth ranges aren't long enough, so I couldn't have a little speaker or anything. We tried having my phone on the platform, but then you could see it. It's also in water, so it had to be in a pouch. Anyway, it didn't, so I had to learn how to find the rhythm within myself so that it would be more or less equal every time for when we then went into editing, so that we would be able to edit the different parts of the choreography together.
That's really challenging.
So that was something I hadn't had to do before. I had created without music before, so that was all right. But I'd never created and performed without music to then try and put music on afterwards.
Yeah. During this time, which it did take quite a bit of time to create this whole thing, though, or from the beginning to end here, but given that this was during COVID, do you feel that this was able to take the shape that it did because you had the literal space in your schedule and time in the world to make this? Or if we had been in a different circumstance and say you had inspiration to do something, whether it was this piece or not, would you have followed through in the same way to create this film? Or do you feel that COVID has provided that like space in your life for it?
I think a little bit of both. So I think COVID definitely provided the space to create something of this size at this point in my life, because I'd only ever created little things with my colleagues. So COVID definitely opened up a door that I chose to go through and explore all the way. It was also challenging just in terms of I had to fly people in to work with me, and the borders were closed, and things were changing constantly. So people didn't know if they could come and work with me at the times that were mutually available, and that was in and of itself a challenge, figuring out all of this. Can we work? Can we not work? Does it have to be distanced? Luckily it was outside most of it, so we didn't have much trouble there, but we definitely had, was filmed in a very remote area in Sweden. So it was not like there was an airport close by. You had to fly and then, drive 4 or 5 hours to get there and get tests and all sorts. So yes, I think I had the time to explore in a way that I had not had before. And I also think that I will be giving myself more time to explore, because I did something that I really enjoyed and I would like to continue doing. So in that respect, yes. But in terms of how it was planned and how it was executed, not only have I now learned a lot about this whole process, I'm working with a lot of different people, also from different fields that I had not really done before in this way, and explaining how and what you want from a dance film as opposed to a normal film. I think without COVID, the whole experience would have been different. My platform was delayed because of it. People, I wasn't sure they would arrive with the flights that we thought, there was all sorts going on. So yes and no, it was both a good space of time, and it came with all the normal COVID issues.
Yeah. Well, something that I've really admired about your process from the outside is that you've taken you've epitome of taken lemons and made lemonade. You were supposed to be auditioning as COVID came about. So many dancers were in your position as well. Careers were, set to start and then nothing, and then we had to stop and shut down. And you went from, I imagine, working in beautiful spaces with amazing colleagues to being in your garage, working by yourself. And you were able to, and I imagine that it was a choice, but maybe you have a little more to say on this, that you were able to say, okay, this is not what I thought was going to happen. This was not what I planned, but I'm going to make the most of what I can right now. And I'm positive that there were moments of, label it whatever you want, despair, anger. Why is this happening? I want to be in a real studio. I want to be back in the world. I'm stuck in the middle of Sweden, in the middle of nowhere. I'm sure there were those moments, but you've really taken the space that was created by COVID and pushed your art, your artistry, your career forward in a direction that is stunning and going to propel you forward into other things that probably would not have been recognized or come to fruition as quickly if you hadn't taken we'll call it the COVID space and embraced it. And I think that that's something that dancers can relate to very deeply, but then also look for in the future when things don't go the way you're planning, you don't make the auditions you're looking at, they don't fall into the chronological order that we're planning, which seems to happen all the time. There are so many doors that you can step through that could take us down something maybe even greater than what you were originally planning.
No, absolutely. That's all true. I didn't, I definitely tried to use the time as best as possible. I didn't go in, I think, thinking that already. I just went in, as I said, I just went in and was exploring. But yeah, there was lots of moments of desperation and wonder whether it would work, and frustration as well with things that weren't working. I had so much back and forth with the costume because it was falling off because it was heavy and it was getting wet, and I couldn't find a material that looked like material but was waterproof. So I was, spraying all sorts and washing it with different liquids and trying to put floating mechanisms underneath and all kinds of things that worked or didn't. And I don't think I danced as many hours as I usually did. That's for sure. I danced way less. And yet I feel like I grew so much in the process. So actually coming out of it afterwards, I had a little bit of catching up to do in terms of where I wanted to be for auditions, because I hadn't been spending the time in class as I usually would and working as I usually would. But I feel like I learned so much about myself that there is much more that I can now bring to class because I took this time. I took it, or I thought I had to, or I
whatever
decided to, or I don't know, spend that time on this particular project. So yeah.
Well, yeah. I kind of view what you're sharing about your movement and coming out of this with things that you didn't have before. I kind of think of like when you go to a workshop or something of a style that you just know nothing about, or your body's not used to it. And it's very challenging. And I remember certain things where I was like, I'm not going to use this. Like, this is not a style I like. This is not where I want to end up. And when you fully dive in and come out of that experience, all of a sudden your movement is more informed. It's easier to do certain things that look nothing like that thing you did, that it was not what you were planning.
Yeah.
But of course, the variety informs and challenges and is exciting for your natural style. There were definitely elements in filming that were not, obviously they were on a board that was floating in the middle of the water. I believe you also did some water work. So how did those things inform your movement afterwards? Were there things that you had to figure out in the moment, working in the water, working with water and costumes and whatever else that you now carry into your dancing as you're going through auditions and putting your style back onto hard floor?
One of the things, as you mentioned, I haven't mentioned it yet, was the director thought there would be really nice. So Maria thought it was really nice to have a section underwater as well. Also exploring sort of the duality with over and underwater. So, so at the beginning, we didn't even know if it would work. I've never danced underwater. I didn't know if I could do it, but I sort of said, let's give it a go and see what happens. So we quite literally just jumped into the lake with a GoPro and just saw if it at all would work. And she was so excited by these first few images and said, "Oh, we absolutely have to do this. This is gonna look great." But then we have the whole underwater section as well, and all of a sudden, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the underwater section. I couldn't really rehearse for it because I could rehearse a little bit in the lake, but all the swimming pools were closed because of COVID, and we decided to film it in a swimming pool. Because we were hoping to have warmer water and safer conditions, because it's quite challenging and quite it can be a bit of a risk to be underwater for that amount of time, especially if you're not a free diver or someone who is swimmer or is used to being in water in that way. So we had to have a few safety divers, and we figured that it was best to go to a swimming pool and have that sort of in a more controlled conditions, which I am very grateful that we did, because that was one of the most challenging experiences of my life so far, physically of my life so far. We were unlucky, and the swimming pool was actually broken. The heating in the swimming pool was broken. So It was really cold. It was absolutely freezing in the water. And I had to learn how to use the oxygen tanks from scuba divers, which I hadn't. I had scuba dived once before, like many years before. So I had done it once, but I didn't really remember how. And it takes a little bit of getting used to, because at least for me, it felt like you couldn't take as deep breaths. So I'd been rehearsing just holding my breath and trying to go through the choreography or the parts that were underwater, just holding my breath in the studio. But that's way easier, and I could hold my breath for way longer when I was over water than when I was underwater. That and the fact that the water was so cold made my body contract. So it was unbelievably difficult to move with these two elements. Then a third element, which I had no idea would affect me so much, was we laid the pool with black plastic so that it would look as natural as possible. That meant that when I went down, it was completely black and I could not see anything at all. I had no reference to where any of the divers were. The camera had a little light on it, so I could kind of see where the camera was, but I couldn't see the lens or anything. I could just see the general area. And I almost felt like my body was panicking, even though mentally I was fine. My body was going into sort of fight or flight response. And I remember just having to think on the spot and try and calm myself down, meanwhile trying to figure out how to be moving and breathing and underwater. It was 2 very intense days. And I ended up with an ear infection, and then and they gave me all sorts of electrolytes afterwards to replenish my body, because it was so cold. I was forced to go in and out of the water every 15 minutes to heat up. And they had this bucket filled with warm water that I'd jump into and sort of heat up and then go back into the cold. So I had this also extreme temperature changes as well. So don't underestimate how hard it is to do anything in water. I definitely did. And I learned my lesson.
Oh my gosh. When you were filming this part of it, I can't remember if I told you this. I feel like maybe I didn't, because I had my own experience, not dancing in water, but I had done my first triathlon after I stopped dancing. And it included, I don't know, I think it was 400 meters of swimming the first time. The second time was a mile. And it was in a lake up in the mountains. It had snowed the day before. It was really cold. And I'd been practicing swimming in a pool, and I'm not a swimmer, but I'm confident in the water. And I got in the lake, and like you said, my brain was calm, but my body was not. I like doggy paddled. I couldn't put my head in the water, and I was mentally calm. I was not afraid of drowning. I was fine, but my body was not fine. And I seized up, and I had the like paddleboard people that are there, like your emergency divers. I had the paddleboard that people that were like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, I'm fine. I'm gonna make it. But my body, it was very humbling because I had been training for this. I also have a lifetime of dance, and I'm thinking I can do this. And it was a totally different experience. So changing your elements really changes the way you have to train. And I think sometimes dancers, we train in the same type of environment all of our lives. Very rarely does somebody get the opportunity or is asked to perform in something different than a flat ground that has Marley. Maybe you're dancing in shoes on concrete, but we have very similar environments. So pushing or being asked to be in something different can completely change the way you have to train your body. If you were to do this again, I'm sure there would be things you would do in preparation for an experience like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely go and spend a lot more time in the water if I had to do it again. And also figuring out, I hadn't really thought about it, but anything that was sort of a background or anything where your head was lower than anything else, all the water would go up my nose, right? Of course. And that's not something that I'd thought about, but is, at least for me, extremely uncomfortable when you're then trying to do any kind of movement that's coming then back upright. Yeah. And you have
right up the
your sinuses full of water, and you're trying to not breathe, like not take in a breath and not let out bubbles because you don't want bubbles on the screen. I mean, all of this random things. Or if they're giving you oxygen, you can't go up to the surface without the oxygen, because you can end up with oxygen poisoning, which I didn't know either. So you have to you take the air, you have to hold your breath, and then do whatever you need to do. And then you ask them to come and give you the oxygen back. And then you need to have enough air still so you can sort of release the water that's in the mouthpiece. And then you can start breathing again to then try and regain your breath, do this whole thing again, ask them to give you more oxygen and whatever. And then when you decide that you need to go up, then you have to have the mouthpiece and they help you up. And yeah.
It just makes the process so tedious. It expands the time so much of what it would take to make that short clip, I'm sure.
Yeah, I thought
it was 2 days.
I thought it was going to be way easier.
Yeah. Well, also
very wrong.
Moving through water, just thinking as like a training standpoint, if you were going to do again something underwater, not only would you be training for your breath and spending more time in the water, but the resistance, the speed in which you can make something happen in your body dramatically changes. And I'm sure there was some body soreness that came with having to move through the water without having the training behind it. I imagine moving with, bands or things outside of the water. It's as close to being in the water as I think we could replicate, but also it's a different speed. I'm just thinking if you were trying to get to the end point quickly, 2, 3, 4, you're like, I'm trying, it's so different than what you could be doing outside rehearsing on normal ground in the studio.
Absolutely. There's that. So there's a little bit more resistance, and you have to move. You don't have to, but you end up moving a little bit slower than you usually would. But also you are sort of weightless. So even I was wearing some weights to keep me down, but there's sort of a weightlessness to it, which means that you can, and if I were to do it again, I'd definitely be exploring this more. Places where I thought, for example, I would push off with my legs and thought I would do one thing, I actually ended up doing something completely different, which then would throw me off, and I had to recalibrate the direction in which I was going. There was a few times where I thought I'd be sort of in a second and sort of pushing to the side, but without sort of propelling myself sideways. But just because I was used to pushing with a certain amount of force, and in water you weigh less, I would just sort of shoot out in different directions, and I wasn't that I wasn't expecting, or sort of end up upside down, or like doing a full turn in some random position that you just is physically impossible outside of water, which was, now that I think about it, a lot of fun. In the moment, I was just processing so much and trying to sort of make it work with that I don't know if I enjoyed it that much in the moment, but in retrospect, it was actually, there was a whole element of the possibilities of movement in water that, because you're somewhat weightless.
Yes. I mean, it's challenging and fun, but I totally get in the moment, especially if it's a surprise, right? That first time you get in there and with the skirt and the weight or whatever else is happening.
I was also very uncomfortable. So I was constantly trying to just tell myself that everything was fine.
I totally get that. Is there something that stands out from this whole process as like a lesson or something that you're going to take with you that you feel is going to make a difference in your dancing in the future?
As an artist, definitely collaborating and working with other people to the extent that I did in this particular work. That was absolutely beautiful. And I learned so much. And there were, again, definitely bumps in the road where I thought I had expressed exactly what I wanted, or I was being very clear, only to then realize later that I had not been fully clear, or that they had understood it, but in a slightly different way.
I'm sure that I know this from working with like lighting people and being in stage. My vocabulary as a dancer is different than that of a lighting technician. And you have to learn the vocabulary and how to express yourself in the way for that medium to be successful. So I think that's kind of what we're experiencing.
Absolutely. So we had that on the one hand with the film crew, with the director of photography. He wasn't a dance. I don't think he'd done much dance before. I think he'd had some dancers in some work before, but not a dance on screen work per se. And so there was an element of sort of getting the aesthetic that we were looking for, but also learning from what they saw and what they could bring to the process that I hadn't thought about, because I don't have the knowledge that they have. So that whole communication, collaboration aspect, I found incredibly inspiring, challenging, but incredibly inspiring for the future. I think humans are so beautiful and they have so much to bring, and there's so much that you can find when people are given the chance to have a voice or to speak. So that was also very important for me throughout the whole process, that anyone that was involved had the opportunity to say and to contribute and to be a part of the creative process, not just me sort of saying this is what it is and this is what we're going to do, which you also have to do at some point. But it just wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do most of the time. That really had a big impact on me. As a dancer, I think I realized that you can do a whole lot more than you think you can. Which, and it's so easy to have some mental block. I can't do this, or this is going to be too hard, or I haven't trained enough, or it's not ready, or it's never ready. You're never going to be good enough, and that's okay. Or you are good enough just as is. You can see it.
You can put it both ways.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, you just have to go for it and see what happens. And if it's not what you wanted or what you envisioned, you can try again. There's very few things that you cannot try again. Or give it another go.
Dancers, I actually end up dealing with this quite a bit within myself, as a professional in the dance world, or a trainer, somebody who's working with dancers, and then also running a business. There's very, very much this part of me that does not want to put things out until they're perfect. And perfect is relative. That's the problem is that there is no perfect. There's always a different benchmark for each person or for myself. And very, 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 very rarely do I end up hitting this mark where I think, even just for myself, oh, that's quote perfect. It's just never there. So over the years, it has been a learning process as a business owner in the dance world with a dance brain background to be okay to put things out and say, it is what it is. And not as it's a, whatever, like you're saying, we can kind of take it the two ways of like, we are everything we are, or we're never perfect, and they kind of go together on the two sides. But I see that a lot in the dance world where we spend all of our time in front of the mirror, nitpicking the perfection that we have created. We're still nitpicking it, and we're still trying to find the things that are terribly wrong with us when we are perfectly, beautifully, artistically moving. And I think that holds us back a lot.
And there's an element of trust there as well, trusting your body and trusting what you've learned and trusting that you can do it, and giving yourself that chance is huge. And it takes a bit of mental work, a bit of physical
It takes
work,
a lot of mental work. I think it takes a lot of bravery.
I don't think I'm there in every aspect. I don't think I ever will be, but it's definitely something that,
being an artist takes bravery, and being an individual without having the director to tell you, yes, good, that's what I want. But you creating or being freelance and working by yourself, or building your repertoire from, a pre-professional to professional, whatever that means for you working by yourself and continuing to be the push takes a lot of bravery, because there is no validation from the overhead person of you. When you're in a company or work for someone, it's not easy to hear. There's downfalls to it too, but you have someone who tells you good, bad, yes, no, do this, do that. But when you're by yourself, you have to trust whatever you're putting out there and have enough grace to say, like, it wasn't exactly what I wanted, but I did it and I've learned, and I'll keep growing. And this is just a step in the journey.
Yeah. And then also I think voicing your concerns or voicing what you have inside to people that you trust along the way is also super important. It's something that I'm not particularly good at. But I think that's, creating those connections with the people that you trust the most and are the closest to you, because that would also bring you forward as a human, and it'll reassure you in a good way, I hope. Realizing that everyone probably is struggling with something or is going through something. I think that's a big part of it as well. I was just thinking in terms of like training, what I was doing at the time. And I think I was mostly just cross training with you and doing Pilates, and then working on the choreography and trying to get in sort of a warm-up class for myself. It was definitely a lot less than I usually do in terms of like dancing wise. I was quite physical, but dancing wise, it was a lot less. But yeah, in retrospect, my body could do it. I probably could have trusted it a lot more, and not. I think I could spend a lot of time worrying that I wasn't dancing as many hours as I perhaps usually did. But maybe it would have been different if I had more hours. But
there's something really powerful, and I see it with a lot of I'm going to say advanced dancers, meaning your mental process is advanced. You are aware of your body, whether you are a professional level or a quote amateur level, but you are aware, you're working on yourself, you're constantly working to improve. Taking time away from the studio to focus on other aspects of your body intensely can be extremely beneficial. And I see it over and over, and it tends to happen with my professional dancers because we have seasons and there's chunks of time that we're doing something intensely or not. It's happened a lot over COVID because of forced time where dancers are saying, oh my gosh, I was barely dancing in the studio. I was dancing in my kitchen. I haven't jumped or really turned or bought to my full potential in months, but I was focused on other things. And I got back to the studio and I was so much stronger in all of these ways. This was really easy to gain back, the things that were missing from being in your home. That's been a really common story I'm hearing. And I know I've experienced that in the past. There was a summer that I didn't dance at all. All I did was different types of cross training. And I came back and my batmas were higher, my pirouettes were better, my body felt better. And I was like, I didn't take a single class for 2.5 months. And it just happened. So I think it's okay to give your body even your brain the chance to focus on other elements of your body that are not specifically ballet in the studio with pointed toes or whatever that looks like as your dance. It's okay to do other things and you will gain from that if that's your intention as you do them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've discovered that.
Yeah. It's a good thing because we're not always available to be our full dancing self in the studio all the time,
But you're also a human dancing, and there's something about communicating the human behind in whatever role or whatever part or piece and the more human things and experiences and that you can bring to the table or that you have inside, the more it will manifest in also your dancing. So at least I think also an artistic element or a human element that's there that you cannot really gain from just being in the dance studio.
Yeah, absolutely. So, absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that your film brings to the table here. So I'm excited for everyone to go check out what you've created. Where can everyone find you on Instagram and follow what you're doing currently?
So there's an Instagram for the film itself, and it's at _iuSui_. So it's iuSui on Instagram, and we try to post quite regularly a little bit of behind the scenes of what was created, some images from the footage. We'll be posting on where it can potentially where it will be viewed, what film festivals and stuff that it will go into. And then sometime in the future it'll probably end up on YouTube, but it'll all be on the Instagram. So keep your eyes peeled on that. And
very exciting.
Kind of it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I'll post the link so you guys can go follow. The behind the scenes stuff is awesome to see, especially after you hear Berenice sharing what she experienced, and especially with the water stuff. I'm loving to see the little things that are behind the scenes. So go check that stuff out, and you can follow her there on Instagram. Thank you so much for taking time to share your process and to share with dancers and around the world how this went for you. As we said, this was not an episode that is about making our bodies the best, but I really think it's about making our minds the best. And you have taken the last 2 years and made it into something very quite physically beautiful. And you yourself have grown a lot and become quite an artist after this time. And I wish that for every dancer in any season as we go forward. There will be times that just don't go the way that we expect them to. That's the way it's going to happen. There's going to be blocks in the road, and they're going to be personal or the world. And I hope that after this time, we're able to handle these little blocks that pop up more graciously for ourselves so that we give ourselves more grace. And you've done that so beautifully. So thank you so much for sharing everything.
Thank you for having me. It was great to speak to you about it and share.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. I hope that this got the creative juices flowing, that we are starting off the year well, and that you guys are going after what you want, what you desire. be brave, follow that creative drive, and find the people who can assist you to literally make your dreams come true. That's it for this week. So I will see you all right back here next time on Beyond the Point.